Hello everyone and welcome to this Reuters Events webinar. We will give everyone else, I can see that there's already over 70 people in the room, so thank you for being so punctual today. We will give everyone else about 30 seconds just so that they don't miss anything. So don't go anywhere and we will be with you very shortly. Okay, we will get started. Thanks to all of you who have joined already. Welcome to this Reuters Events webinar, Synthesise RWE and AI, Transform Patient-Driven Healthcare. My name is Carla Sharp. I'm a Director of Research and Projects for Reuters Events Pharma, and I'm very excited to be joined today by an esteemed panel of experts in data, RWE and AI. They are Kelly Zoe, Nicholas Kelly, Andrew Rosen, and Jill Pober. And they'll be introducing themselves shortly, so hold on a second for that. It's a pleasure to be joined by all of you. We've had over 1,200 attendees register for this event, and I think that just goes to show how important and challenging this topic is. So thank you for joining us for the hour, and a special thanks to Cegedim Health Data for sponsoring this webinar and bringing the topic to the forefront. A few pieces of housekeeping from me just before we introduce the panel. We are going to be using the Q&A box today throughout. We want to keep the discussion as interactive, and we'll be leaving a portion of time at the end to take your audience questions, so please submit your questions throughout. Also, where possible, give us your name, your company name, so that we can direct the question and the answers effectively. We're also going to be conducting a couple of polls, so watch out for those and please get involved because they'll help us guide the discussion, knowing what your kind of key concerns and key interests are. With a link to AI, we're also providing AI translated subtitles for today's session. You can click on Show Captions at the bottom of your screen to enable these. Select the speaking language as English and select your preferred language to translate into. There are 31 language options, so hopefully we're able to cater for you. Today's webinar is being recorded, so we will aim to share the recording with you in the next week or so, and you can watch it back on demand at your leisure. So what I wanted to do, we talked about polls. To get you all warmed up with a quick poll, we're going to launch a quick question for you now. The question is, please answer whether or not your organization is currently investing in AI. So are you currently directing investment into AI for enhanced RWD use? Wow, a lot of you are quick off the mark. I can see a lot of votes coming in. Thank you. Already over 50% of you have voted. And it's a bit of a mixed bag, actually. So we have currently 48% of you saying yes, 20% saying no, 32% thinking about it. So let's just share the results with you. We have quite a few of you have already voted. And that's really good to know. I think that will help guide our conversation for the rest of the session. So thank you. What I want to do now is introduce our panelists. So Kelly, I will come to you first. If you could say a few words about yourself, that would be fabulous.
Hi, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I really want to thank Reuters Events for hosting this event, as well as Cegedim for sponsoring it. And I'm really looking forward to discussing these interesting and timely topics with our panelists. So my name is Kelly Zoe. I'm the head of Global Medical Analytics and Real-World Evidence at Viatris. Viatris was formed through a merger between two companies. One of them was a division at Pfizer, another one was Mylan. So that was formed about 2 years ago. So I came from the Pfizer side, where I was vice president, the head of medical analytics and insights. And I also had a quite extensive research background in terms of real-world evidence as well as statistics. In addition, I also have about 10 years experience in academia, where I was associate professor in radiology at Harvard. So where in radiology, as you know, in imaging research, AI is a big component. And I also want to mention that our recent project happened to be the winner of the Reuters Events Pharma USA Data Project winner back in December, just a few months ago. So it's really timely to talk about data, talk about big data, AI, real world data, and so on and so forth with all of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Nicholas, would you like to go next? Oh, I think you may be muted. Always happens at least once.
Yeah, no matter how many times I remind myself. No, so I'm with Novartis. I'm the Director of Data Science and AI Portfolio Strategy and Innovation. I think the most relevant bit of what that means is that I'm looking kind of end to end across the value chain, trying to identify where we think are the biggest opportunities to convert data into value and influence decision-making and hypothesis generation. And so it's amazing how often now when we look at what are the relevant, who are the relevant stakeholders, and especially data types, that real world data is one of those data types. And so we might not be the experts in the company on real world evidence or health economics. We're the experts on machine learning and the operating across the value chain. So it's very fun to kind of assemble a great team from some of the experts on different data modalities, machine learning, business stakeholders as well. So, I did do my sabbatical once in health economic outcomes research, where I did get my personal experience hands-on, for better and worse, with trying to make sense of health economic and real world evidence. So, thanks.
Thank you. Andrew, would you like to go next?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm Andrew Rosen. I'm a senior director at Moderna. I lead the integrated evidence function, which sits within the division of global real-world evidence. My role is to bring together all of the excellent teams driving forward evidence generation at Moderna and collaborate on an integrated evidence generation plan and to facilitate the execution of that plan. Real-world evidence is the domain in which we primarily work in, and we're also very passionate about digital and AI, and I think there's tremendous promise, so it's really exciting to be here. Thank you,
Andrew. And Jill?
Have a slide, please.
Yeah,
okay. Thank you for joining today to all the attendees, and it's a real pleasure to be here today, and also thank you to all the other speakers for joining me today. I am Gilles Cobert. I'm the global head of Cegedim Health Data and senior vice president. Our activity is 100% focused on real-world data, real-world evidence, and AI based on real-world data. For the moment, AI represents less than 10% of our activity, but it's growing. The foundation of our activity, we're expert in collecting, coding, and structuring anonymous electronic health record, but also unstructured data. Our main real-world database is called SYN, ready for AI, for care, but also for research. And also interesting and quoted in the last EMS report, a real-world evidence framework to support EU regulatory decision-making. It's good to read. We cover 7 European countries, including the 5 major ones. We work with pharma industries, academics, healthcare authorities, HCPs, of course, because it's the foundation of our job. And our data is free for not sponsored research. We have a major link with all the universities in Europe. Personally, I come from research background in molecular genetics, and it's quite a long time. I've been working in data analysis for 30 years, not 13, 30 years. We are driven by innovation, machine learning, NLP, and so on. And AI is a fantastic playground, and we are only just beginning to glimpse all the future applications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilles. Now it's time to delve into our discussion around AI's potential in improving real-world evidence and data. Perhaps we'll start by framing why we're here to talk about the topic today first off, and then we'll jump into the questions that we, as a panel, put together for the discussion today. So we know RWE has become increasingly useful due to its ability to enhance drug discovery, identify risk, inform patient care pathways, and strengthen adherence. And this has been reflected in more mature guidance and regulatory frameworks. But there's a tremendous pool of data for RWE use, and often the data lacks standardization, organization, and interpretation at scale. In other industries, we've seen artificial intelligence prove itself to be a really useful tool when trying to make sense of large data sets. So what we're going to do today is learn about the opportunities and pitfalls of pharma in leveraging AI. We'll be talking about leveraging AI to decrease the time to process and streamline data, and to understand its application across science, commercial, and improved patient care pathways, and in combination or multiple data sets. So without further ado, I want to ask our panel our first question. And that is, where do you see the most relevant use of AI across patient care, clinical decision-making, and product development? Gilles, I'll come to you first, if you don't mind.
Yes, thank you. For me today, but also based on the activity of the group, the most relevant is about clinical decision-making, especially if we consider the increasingly complex decision-making processes in diagnosis and care, not forgetting the improvement of patient pathways. Now, based on our experience, real-world data, real-world evidence, and applications for healthcare professionals and patients will create a virtuous circle around the data. What I mean, if the data and AI are close to the reality for deciders and patients, it will impact the size of the database due to more contributors, physician and patient. It will also impact the data completeness, data sharing, and so on. Now, if I get back to AI, AI needs to be easy to explain and understand by healthcare professionals and building to healthcare, which makes it more concrete, more relevant, and therefore more acceptable, a key word for AI. That's it for me.
Great, thank you, Gilles. Andrew, would you care to add to that?
Yes, in my perspective, there are at least three major steps forward in medicine enabled by AI and real-world evidence. And one is personalized medicine through data, real-world evidence, and AI. So we can, as Gilles said, enable better clinical decision-making, treating patients not just as their disease, but the complete constellation of properties that make up that patient. So clinical, demographic, personal and behavioral, even socioeconomic, can all be factored in to recommend an approach to treatment that's very specific to that patient. The second major step forward, I think, is preventive medicine, that we are developing models to detect disease earlier and thus intervene earlier, and that enables better patient outcomes. And then finally, patient centricity. Instead of patients just putting their trust in their clinicians, which they should do, they should also have access to data and models that enable them to have a very clear view of what they are entering into with a course of therapy, what they can expect as far as benefits, as far as adverse events, tolerability, and even cost. So all of this is in the realm of possibility. It's happening now, and really major advance in medicine in these ways.
Thank you, Andrew. Nicholas, what would you add there?
So one of my favorite things is to kind of just think along the value chain of pharma. So that's what I'll do. We start at the beginning. I mean, you see people incorporating real-world data into their target ID, and especially target validation efforts, looking for genomic signals and the increasing amount of data that's available, and even some approaches to virtual proof of concepts for, say, indication expansion and these types of things. In the clinic, I think, or in clinical trials, we usually say clinic, but I would say virtual cohorts from disease registries and other sources are very interesting, both to help enter new indications, but also to help where there's no control arms necessary, of course, and also to simply enrich trials through progression modeling, risk prediction, and understanding how generalizable your population is in a real world setting. After that, we talked a little bit, I really like the possibilities out there for social listening and to understand kind of what patients feel the unmet need is for them, what their preferences are. We had a cool example where, our team was able to identify a potential dosing problem in the last month of a biologic dosing regime, where an individual physician was often not aware of this, but to patients, it was all common knowledge. So I think that's going to be very powerful. And, I much agree. I think from a population health point of view, early diagnosis, event detection, I think we're going to see some real progress there in the coming years. So.
Wonderful, thank you. That is a really, really cool example. Thank you for sharing. Kelly, what would you add here, please?
Yeah, first of all, Carla, you mentioned quite a spectrum of potential uses. And then in terms of in the pharma industry, there's so many different functions that can harness this type of data, real world data. When I say real world data, even though our understanding is that it's outside randomized controlled trials, there's no, exclusion in terms of putting these two as complementary. So how real world evidence can accelerate the design, optimize the design and accelerate the approval process all the way till commercialization. But so I agree with, the other panelists' thoughts just now. But on the other hand, I want to also emphasize that this is multi-stakeholder problem, so that you have to see the perspectives of from different angles. And the first one I want to emphasize is really the patient's angle, and patients and their caregivers. And in that way, they really want to see, can I have the my disease, can you understand it better? Can you know who will be the potential customers in the long run? That means the representativeness. And then also, in addition, can we have this medicine that will be curing some of the diseases sooner? And finally, can you also make sure that people can access to those medications? So from every angle, in terms of the patient-centric perspective, you can see the role of AI, starting from drug discovery, and also in terms of the understanding of diseases, disease burden, as well as the usage pattern of medications, the dosage, and so on, as well as all the way till technology assessment, and also in terms of various ways that you can track patients in terms of the safety monitoring. So along the way, I would say real world evidence will play important role in terms of generating the values of for the society, as well as the impact that can be possible.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. So many kind of opportunities and possibilities shared there. I think that what we're going to move into next with a lot of our questions is around the challenges, and then also the solutions to some of those challenges. But before we do that, I did want to ask the audience another question which links to this. So if we could bring up the second poll, please. Excellent. So you should see that on your screen now. This question is, what do you perceive is the greatest challenge in AI's use of patient data? You can select multiple, but I would advise against selecting all of them, just so we can gauge which is your greatest priority. The options there are data privacy, interoperability, data bias, transparency and explainability of AI algorithms, extracting relevant insights, data access facilitation, and AI regulation. It's looking fairly even at the moment, potentially with data privacy and transparency and explainability leading the way there. We have almost, well, over half of you have voted, so do get your votes in if you haven't voted already. We'll keep that open for about 5 more seconds. But that is really useful. That will guide a lot of what we talk about as the conversation goes on. So, okay, we'll close that now, and we'll share the results so that you can also see what everybody's saying. But to confirm, 47% of you have gone with data privacy, 44% of you have gone with transparency and explainability of AI algorithms. I'd love to get just a quick nod from the panelists as to whether that is surprising, or is that kind of consistent with what you're seeing? Give me a nod if that is. Okay. Thank you very much. All right, we will move on from that poll. So what I want to do then for the second question, we're now going to focus on kind of data quality and suitability of AI for AI interpretation. And I think, interoperability came up in that poll. Interoperability and integration play a role in some of these answers. But Gilles, to come to you again first, naturally data is the foundation of AI's meaningful use. What criteria are you seeing data specialists use to assess the quality of data sets collected from diverse sources? And how are they ensuring these data sets are suitable for AI interpretation in your view?
Thank you. Yes. once again, based on our experience, we know that before starting AI development, is really recommended to clearly specify the medical problem and the context to which the AI will be applied. So clinical success criteria may be well defined, and an assessment of the potential risk associated with prediction error must be carried out. It's also very important to work with the most recent data possible. Why? Because a reality from a year ago is sometimes not longer a reality, which is why we have made a major effort to make the data available very quickly. Just to give you an example, on the 15th of each month, we are able to deliver the data of the previous month. This one is very important. Otherwise, we are always able to predict the past. Sample size, of course, is very, very important because the amount of data collected must be large enough for the intended purpose. Representativeness, of course, because the data collected must be representative of the target population and healthcare context. And one word again about the data quality. A thorough assessment of data quality is really essential. This involves inspection and description of missing data, consideration of the potential measurement errors and their underlying mechanism, and an examination of the quality of characteristic variables and outcome is also very important. And in addition, it's essential to ensure compliance with privacy laws.
Thank you, Gilles. Let's mix it up a bit. I will go to Nicholas next, if you may.
Sure. So I'll start again with an example. I mentioned already virtual cohorts. And I think this is a nice example, virtual cohorts and meta-analysis to kind of create external control arms. One of the first things they do, our statisticians like doing, is comparing kind of the statistical measures of the internal clinical trial control group with something made externally, and they're looking for things I mentioned, like how generalizable that population might be, but also standard of care drifts and other things which are, I hadn't, someone not used to working with this data might not have thought to look for, but this is actually a way to highlight the differences in this data distribution in multiple ways. And so, I like the idea of formalizing these to maybe even compare in between different real world data sources, just being a little bit more focused on the properties of that data set going in. Now, I think that would cover the topic of the quality of the data collection and, how representative it is. If we want to go towards intentionally misleading synthetic data, these type of methods might still pose challenges beyond that. And there's been a couple of papers recently on leveraging GANs for creating synthetic patient populations. But I'll leave that answer short. I think we're going to dive into bias, transparency, or privacy, and data centricity later. So
yeah, thank you very much. Kelly?
Yeah, thanks for this question. In fact, yesterday, I just presented to the European Medicines Agency in terms of this topic and in terms of data quality assessment and data quality framework. I would say, first of all, the framework itself is very complex. The reason is that data could come in terms of all forms and shapes. As you know, in terms of real world data, majority of data are even sort of unstructured. I see that in some question from you is that some are talking about text, some are talking about genomics, some are talking about sort of images. So these are really not necessarily that easy to assess quality, just like the traditional type of data that we're looking at. So let's focus on the traditional type of data, such as the STING data, right? So how we're doing right now is really asking feasibility questions. It's really important to ask a set of questions before you even embark on just harnessing them. Of course, the speed is the question to harness sometimes, right, for regulatory purposes, for example. But when you have rigorous study designs, you really need to know why you want to do this. What are the objectives? Then you start to think about feasibilities and then to understand whether the data will be fit for purpose as well as the data will be quality enough. Now, going back to the frameworks, European Medicines Agency has a draft guidance in terms of data quality framework. So in terms of that, they actually put down reliability, extensiveness, coherence, timeliness, and relevance as the 5 dimensions. Of course, there are multiple sub-dimensions. Now, across the ocean, you end up having here that there are different sort of frameworks. For example, the FDA talks about completeness, consistency, and accuracy. Then there are other frameworks such as Sentinel, PCORNet, so on and so forth. So how would you harmonize these kind of concepts across different regulatory agencies? Because we do have the ICH to look up to in terms of real world evidence and artificial intelligence. But I just want to, say that it's often saying that garbage in and garbage out. So if you don't have high quality data, you're not going to ultimately get the right solution for our patients.
Thank you, Kelly. And I think you've just nicely touched upon one of the audience questions around preparing for regulation, global versus local impact, and how that translates. So thank you for killing two questions there at the same time. Andrew, what would you add to the first question that we were discussing?
Yeah, I agree with everything that has been said. AI models are going to live and die by the quality of the data. So ensuring that we have data that's current, comprehensive, that it's coded in a consistent way, these things are all critical. But beyond the data itself, ensuring that the right technical solutions are in place as far as how to create data lakes and all the other technical components that go along with this, the governance of data, and perhaps most importantly, the analytical methods. We're talking about AI here, and there's a wealth of different types of models and methods to choose from, and ensuring that you apply the right one as per the questions or solutions that you're working toward. That's absolutely critical. So making great strides, but it's becoming increasingly complex. That's why it's so great to have these guidelines in place and have discussions in forums like this.
Thank you, Andrew. Now, to shift gears slightly, and I think you touched upon it, Nicholas, you touched upon it just now in your last question, but to talk about data privacy, as it's a big concern for many. Safeguarding protected health information and ensuring compliance, they're often highlighted as critical actions for any organization storing and interpreting data for RWE use. So what protections are you seeing being installed to prevent breaches and safeguard patient data while AI is being used to collect and analyze that data? Kelly, maybe I'll come to you first on that one, please.
So from my, practicality point of view, first of all, we need to understand the data privacy laws to start with, right? In terms of, in European Union, there's the GDPR. In US, there's the HIPAA, and then there are so many other localization requirements across different jurisdictions. So we really need to understand what will be the impact if you think about data flow, right? If you need to flow the data from one jurisdiction to the other. So right now, if you look at it, the White House does have the transatlantic agreement, and then thinking about how would that impact in terms of localization requirement. I want to say that one way to, in fact, to deal with this problem is really using federated data. So the federated data model, data do not need to travel. So you can use distributed research networks, and then you can safeguard the data. But of course, there's so many other aspects such as patient's consent, and also in terms of the ethics review, IRB requirements. So I would say rather than going into the hardware solution, there are also issues about, cloud computing, and it's a little bit murky. So I think there are so many different components about from patient side, as I mentioned earlier, as well as from the IT side, from the, algorithm side, from our side, the user side of big data.
Thanks, Kelly. Gilles?
Yes, thank you, Kelly. As you mentioned, we have different law. In Europe, we have GDPR, and each country, countries are sovereign. So we have also to be able to deal with some specific constraint country by country. So for us, it's very important because we are a collector of the data, we are a provider of the data, and we have user of the data for research and for care. So in this case, for us, it's very, very important to respect everything. I can start with just an example. In Europe, we are covering 7 countries, so in EU5, Belgium, and Romania. And in Belgium, for example, it's totally forbidden to collect data for rare disease. But we have also to be able to run some research on rare disease. So the reason why we decided a couple of years ago to build a common data model in Europe to be able to create a cohort, a European cohort of patients or a cohort of European patients, especially to be able to reach enough number of patients by cohort just to be able to respect the GDPR. So that's very important, and to start by respecting or to be compliant with GDPR. We have also decided, once again, a couple of years ago, to be anonymized at source. So for us, and also because we have thousands of physicians equipped by our software, we have decided to consider the healthcare professional at the point of care and the point of data collection. And all the data is aggregated for us at this level for care and anonymized at source. So we can consider that, in fact, our database called SYN is anonymized and not personal data. But we are also respecting the GDPR. Some dimensions are also aggregated, for example, age, we can deliver the date of birth, weight, and so on, or fixed, for example, the date of prescription and other security. And of course, tests are carried out regularly to determine the risk of the identification of the data. And at last, but not least, data are hosted in the secure space. And because we are in Europe, it's a European one, and more especially a French one. So once again, we have many different solutions to respect and to protect patient, physician, because it's also important to respect physician, to avoid any de-identification.
Thank you, Gilles. Andrew, what's your perspective on all of this?
I think this all falls into the camp of great power and great responsibility. It's incumbent upon biopharma to make this the foremost consideration, protection of patient sensitive information. So this relates to having the right technical solutions in place, the right governance and procedures. And I think we're making great strides in all of these, but perhaps having transparency and consent are 2 aspects that need to be furthered so that patients know exactly when and how their data is being used. And I think for the most part, patients are more willing to consent when they understand exactly what's happening with this data, and to support better health outcomes for them personally and then for the population at large.
Thanks, Andrew. Nicholas?
So, I mean, through my lens, I think federated learning and anonymization are 2 of kind of the key ways from a technological point of view we can help with this. What I could add is from the AI perspective. I mean, I mentioned, there's already some issues with leveraging generative models to create synthetic patient data for bad, but some of our AI residents actually have worked on projects to create models that can produce biomedical images conditioned on patient characteristics. And, this is, again, a powerful anonymization technique. It then can help us create data sets for benchmarking and method development, et cetera. But yes, I think if we can, get the right regulatory and technological solutions to address this, maybe we can push the boundaries even further. I really like the idea of a patient-centric data paradigm where, patient would have control and access over their own data, opening up new markets, bringing together medical data and socioeconomic. There've been, there's many conversations. That's a longer discussion, but there seem to be some ideas advancing little by little on how this might happen as well. So.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you all for your answers there. Gilles, you mentioned in your previous answer the importance of HCPs and kind of moving the conversation on in that direction, and relative to their importance and their buy-in in all of this. I wondered how you're seeing data and RWE teams demonstrate to the HCPs, in particular, the reliability, the accuracy, the clinical relevance that all of you and Kelly in particular mentioned earlier on. How are they demonstrating that when it comes to data-driven findings derived by RWD? Gilles, maybe you can start.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't yet. Of course, you're right. For us, and not so become we have every day we are in communication with HCP. For us, it starts by a clear communication with HCP. It could be through data feedback, dashboard, population health management. In some countries, in the UK, we are calculating the quality outcome framework for practice by practice. We have a similar approach in France with ROSP. So it starts by this capability to demonstrate in a day-to-day business the value to the HCP of the completeness of the data, the precision of the data. That's very important. And again, because we have thousands of HCP equipped everywhere, they are always asking every month the feedback, the data feedback. So once again, a clear communication with HCP is crucial. And also because now, and it will be more and more important in the future, we have some projects including decision-making system based on algorithm for HCPs. And we make the difference between algorithm and AI. This is, the definition, it's clear, but to be honest, it's probably 80% based on algorithm. It could be complex or very simple, but it's a decision-making system. We have also a group of clinical users. It's very important, once again, to be able to make the difference between data and the clinical decision. Of course, we have scientific committee when we are dealing with researcher. And again, to make the link with researcher is also important because at the end, we have also the main goal to be able to publish. For the moment, now we are close to 2,000 publications based on the real world data. So it must make sense for a researcher and also for HCPs. And when we are getting back to GPs, for example, to demonstrate at the end, due to the data collection quality, researchers are able to publish a scientific paper, they are always a bit surprised, but in fact, at the bottom of the line, and the value, the value chain of the data, what could be the result of the data completeness of the data collection at the GP level. We have also external validation. We have also other data teams. We have a partner. The idea is also to be able to compare with other data sources. It's called open source. And we, because it's not new, we are also able to replicate randomized control clinical trial with real world data. In fact, this helps to strengthen the reliability and the validity of conclusion based on the real world data.
Thank you. Nicholas, would you like to go next?
Sure. So yeah, let me think. From a machine learning point of view, insight generation point of view, years back, the first time we built a machine learning model, I don't think anybody wanted the model, which is fine. There is too much skepticism here. So what we do is you interrogate the model, you find out the insight, you dumb it down to 2 yes/no questions. It was meant to decide who might be benefit from a given therapy, given medical histories and comorbidities, right? So you dumb it down to a couple of yes/no questions. That's fine. You can publish it. It's still valuable. It was in line with some HCP intuition. But what about when we want to get the predictive models into the hands of HCPs? And from the pharma point of view, it's challenging from a logistical deployment issue, but there are health techs now addressing this issue, helping to get models built on, say, anonymized or federated patient data to actually get deployed in live systems where they can maybe benefit real patients. And so thanks everyone who was out there doing that. The other point I thought was we've observed that in general, the acceptance or belief credibility in a model analysis of any kind is more successful when we're working from the beginning with a medical community and kind of collection of stakeholders, rather than associated with a specific therapy. And I think this just makes sense, right? So everyone's incentives are aligned. And actually, we have an example right now doing just that. We think we have an algorithm working on biomedical images, which we think can predict for the first time a bit more accurately who's at risk of hitting the next stage of a disease in the disease progression ladder. And so as this would progress, there's the question, is this a companion diagnostic sort of thing, so that when a physician is already considering a given therapy, they will have a better indication? Or could this, again, to the topic of population health, what would it take for that to be more of a preventive, opportunistic medicine tool, right? And so these are some of the challenges we're thinking about as well.
Awesome, thank you. Andrew?
I think bringing AI and real-world evidence into mainstream medicine requires that we're proactive, that we're transparent, that we're keeping the best interest of the patients and the clinicians in mind and working toward better patient outcomes. So it's incumbent on us to demonstrate the reliability of the data and the models, and we can lean into our research methods and show the development of the models and the validation of those models and continuous validation of those models, really robust research methods. It's also about, beyond confidence, it's about utility, showing the clinicians that this could actually enhance clinical care, improve clinical decision-making. And to do this, again, leaning into research methods, but showing the personalization of data has been successful, in my opinion. And I've seen it in our work in two ways. Moving beyond conventional publication of data into providing hands-on access to the real-world evidence or just general data behind that study, so that the consumer of the data can filter and work with the data, which brings maybe further insights as well as more confidence into the studies that we publish. Out in the field for medical affairs teams to share not just generic data or stale, disease state decks, but really current, comprehensive, and personalized real-world evidence that's specific to a geography. It could be hyper-local or a demographic. I've seen that this can galvanize action in a way that perhaps more generic information cannot. And as Nick noted, pragmatically, there are challenges to doing this, but I think that we're starting to make progress in getting compliance teams on board with how to do this successfully and compliantly. And it's just the future of medicine. So we're slowly finding our way. The guidelines that Kelly noted are going to be instrumental in doing this successfully and with excellence.
Okay, thank you. And Kelly?
So, the panelists already shared quite extensive insights. I would say, first of all, from the interaction with HCPs, the first question is from the compliance side, which functions can really interact, right? Because, their pharma also needs to really safeguard the scientific research from the commercialization. So in terms of interacting with HCPs, we need to be very careful, in terms of not driving the science just through commercial purposes. On the other hand, in terms of the kind of questions that HCP might be interested in, first of all, understanding diseases. Secondly, understanding the patients, not just say patients in the RCTs, but more broadly, the patients whom they will be treating in the long run. And they will also, want to know something about patient, drug utilization patterns, patient journey, patient voice. Early on, we talked about social listening. There are also ways to interact with digital innovations, such as apps, such as digital therapeutics. So in terms of AI, there are so many different ways that HCPs can gather, information from the patients. And then also it's a two-way stream, because patients receive treatment advice from HCPs, and then HCPs also would like to listen to the patients to see and meet their needs.
Thank you, Kelly. So I can see quite a few questions coming in from you in the audience. I have one more question that I want to ask. So keep your questions coming in and we will definitely have time to get to some of those. My final question was around this kind of bias in data. It came up in the poll at the beginning. Nicholas, you also mentioned it pretty early on around the kind of ethical concerns. So I would love to ask you, how can the challenges of inherited biases and ethical concerns be addressed? Nicholas, I'll come to you first, as you mentioned it earlier.
Okay, thanks. So couple points. So I think we need to be better aware of bias always in the back of our mind from a practitioner point of view, as well as to someone who's interpreting generalizability of a model. I think in our previous discussion, in some cases, let's say for discovery, people can claim bias can even be turned into an advantage, that a signal might be easier to pick up in a homogeneous population. But on the other hand, for treatment decision-making for patients, we need to understand how generalizable that model was. And I think for that, we need to understand the data that this model was trained on and evaluate its performance across that data distribution. We invited Andrew Ng from Stanford to our data science conference last fall. And one of the trends in the field is a data-centric paradigm for machine learning and AI rather than a model-centric paradigm. And that means exactly that, is understanding how your model performs across the variation you might observe, say, in a population, where it might be weak and where you might have an obligation to either invest money to generate some new data and go in search of data, or at least be very clear which situations and contexts it should be used for and not used for, and in general, just better uncertainties reported with these predictions coming out of AI. So these are some of the topics I think that come to mind when I think about bias, and we're trying to create general tools to enable our data scientists to do this more easily in their everyday life. So
wonderful, thank you. Andrew?
I think we need to be, as Nick said, acutely aware of the risk and cognizant of the specific properties properties of the data that will generate this model. And Nick spoke to generalizability, but also alluded to the fact that the applications of the model can be pretty specific. It doesn't have to be one size fits all. Making it too generalizable might bring along some challenges. So being specific about what the model is built on and what it is meant to do, and monitoring this continuously and being acutely aware of that, what the model produces is a direct product of what we put into that model as far as data. It's absolutely essential, and there's real risk in ignoring that property.
Thanks, Andrew. Kelly?
So for AI, I would consider the framework of risk and benefit. First of all, what will be the potential risks associated with various types of biases? And in terms of biases, that could be intentional, that would be really, really bad, and then also unintentional. Because intentional will be perhaps when you collect the data, when you generate the data, you just want to do it in a very maybe speedy way, so that you're not thinking about all these different data quality dimensions. You're just thinking about, let's get this done, right? Because sometimes turnaround is also important. And then the second thing is that really the unintentional aspects. For example, the measurement instrument, that will come in terms of biases. And how would you think about calibration? How do you think about, aspects that could be associated with missing data? And that could be missing at random versus missing not at random. So there's so many different elements that can go into biases, but ultimately, I think what will be the potential benefits and the risks. And also, I think for the public who will be looking at those insights, they will be thinking about trustworthiness. How can I really trust if your data are not trustworthy to start with? That could be potentially being biased.
Thanks, Kelly. And Gilles?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. Probably I will repeat some words and some phrases, some purpose already explained by the other speakers. But you know, when we started, we started by something very simple, just to try to predict the past, because we have millions of patients since 1994. So just to understand and to simulate bias. And to be able to demonstrate the validity of the system, first of all, is to try to predict the past. But it's really essential when we are deploying AI system is to establish accountable processes that can mitigate bias. Of course, this includes the use of range of technical tools as well as operational practices, such as internal evaluation teams, what we have, or third-party audit. You know, we also propose to researchers and universities to use the database as a sandbox to test, to adapt algorithm. And just to give you an example, when we're working with a physician, hospital-based on disease, depending on the profile of the patient used to develop the algorithm on the AI system, we have to adapt, to understand and to adapt. If for example, is to detect some patient at an early stage of a rare condition or a chronic disease, we have to adapt to the retail market or to the primary care market. So it's very important to test, and also what we have installed a couple of years ago is the human guarantee. What does it mean for us? It's just a collaboration between human and machine, because very important to consider how humans machine can work together to mitigate bias. Processes involving human in the loop interaction can help to reduce bias. We can, of course, also run algorithm in with human decision maker, comparing result and using explainability techniques to understand the reason behind observed differences. Also for us, because it's what we did in the past, and to invest in diversifying the community working on AI. We have lots of partners, so to open the database to partnership, it's very important because we can run at the same time with the same goal, different techniques, just to be sure what we are focusing on the same result. And the reason why we already apply these techniques and working with major universities in the room for us is really to open the database and to share results, to share techniques with a large community of researchers. It could be private and public one.
Thank you, Gilles. Now we do have time for some questions. I've seen quite a few come in over the last few minutes. There's one from John Birch, which links quite nicely to our conversation just now. I will tweak the wording just slightly and ask you all, what are the kind of priority investments associated with extracting bias-free AI, AI-ready data from today's health data sets? Anybody like to start off there and answer that question from John? I guess maybe in terms of those kind of priority areas for investment, maybe even kind of places where our audience can focus on.
Perhaps the data assets themselves. These are sets to be purchased in some cases, or sets to be licensed or accessed in various ways, or to be built from the ground up. And yeah, it's the most critical investment is the data itself. Beyond that, the technical infrastructure to make good use of the data and the right personnel that's trained on doing so in a way that is minimizing bias and maximizing the application.
Thank you. Nicholas, you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna let someone else go first, but my view is also more from how do we enable the organization to better leverage it. So it's a little different lens, but and there I think it's just having easy ways to, having your data platform, especially for your internal data, but having a easy way to be aware of all the different sources that are out there that we might have access to as an organization that might have been used by someone in the past, that we have a quick and easy way to access this and integrate this with other data sets. So maybe I'm looking at it more from the investments we need to make, especially technically and change management wise, to better utilize this internally. So I think in line with what Andrew said.
Great, thank you. Kelly, I see your hand up as well.
So first of all, I have to reread this question, once more. And I think, when you say bias-free AI ready, that's not trivial in terms of, identifying the areas where there are data gaps, because, by definition, real-world data are really many of them are from routine practice. So that type of data are messy to begin with. So when you say bias-free, we need to be kind of striking the balance, not just say removing all the kind of elements that could be really valuable, that could be some outliers, could be there for a reason, versus, some are really, we need to understand whether there is some data gaps or missing data mechanism that we need to deal with. And secondly, in terms of AI readiness, that's also non-trivial, because I think, first of all, one area that could be really investment for the sponsors will be thinking about interoperability across different data sets, because many times if you think about high quality registries, right, alone, but biopharmaceutical companies would like to know how patients use their data. How would you link that kind of high quality data to their routine, healthcare information? How do they fill the medications? How would they, go for other aspects? So that's really, really challenging if you just look at one type of data only to have this generalizable AI algorithms. Finally, I think capability is important because, this is something evolving in the society as well as evolving for the biopharmaceutical industry.
Thanks, Kelly. I want to squeeze in one more question, but Nicholas, did you have something?
Yeah, just going to add real quickly. When we're oftentimes thinking of patient data, I think it's very challenging and perhaps not counterproductive to think of how do we get our data in a state that is all unified and normalized and ready for an analysis. I think you're going to have to do some bit of data engineering and wrangling to answer whatever specific question you have. And so, maybe there's nothing that's truly ab initio AI ready, but another part of it is just having the proper people power, skill sets, capabilities, and tools to shape that data into a form appropriate for answering whatever question you're really trying to get at. So
thank you. And Gilles, a final thought on that question?
Yes, a very important question, because when we launched the database many years ago, it was the main issue. Say, how can we be representative of the day-to-day practice, but also to be able to propose the data ready for AI, ready for research, because the coding system is not the same. Because a GP, for example, or a primary care physician, the ICD-10 OMOP doesn't make any sense for physicians. So the idea is to respect the day-to-day practice of the physician and to be able to map the data at point of care with other information like lab test result. And based on the past, many years ago, we used different systems. Now we are using LOINC, ICD-10, SNOMED, and we are also able to map with OMOP for the research. But the idea is not to lose information and to still ready for AI, because for us, the database, the foundation of the database is to be able to understand and to play with patient characteristic and clinical outcomes. So the reason why, and again, starting by the physician, we need to respect the practice and to be able to code and to avoid losing any information. And again, coding, a structuration of the data to be ready for AI, but it's not so easy, and we preferred to concentrate all the information at the point of care to build the patient lifeline. Because when we are trying to match the data with other databases, for example, to match primary care, secondary care, hospital care, but we always have a GDPR issue, we're able to lose data. It's not so easy. And again, we are starting by the point of care.
Thank you, Jules. Now, I did want to squeeze in another question, but we have actually run out of time. Thank you for submitting all of your questions. There were some really important ones in there. So we will see if we can get some of those answered, or at least put them to the panelists to have a look at. Just want to thank all of our panelists, Jules Paubert, Kelly Zoe, Nicholas Kelly, Andrew Rosen. Thank you so much for your time for the last hour, and also the planning and preparation that went into this. It's been a really fabulous discussion with some important food for thought, lots of opportunities, lots of challenges to overcome, but a very exciting future in AI and RWE indeed. So thank you all for joining us. Join us next time. Have a great day, morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
so much. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.